Hi, I'm Brian Moran, founder of Government CIO. Welcome to Government CIO Magazine.
Hi, this is Hillary Wax for Government CIO Magazine. Today we will be interviewing Jill Singer, the CIO of the National Reconnaissance Office.
Well, I think when I look at the best business practices that we've implemented, I'd start with our optimizing IT focus, which is a strategic approach that we documented just about 2 years ago that said, here's where NRO is today from an IT organizational perspective, and here's really where we want to be. Here's how we want to change, how we want to grow, and how we want to adopt. Not too different from good strategic planning, which I think is a best practice, but we did specifically focus it with a tagline called Optimizing IT, and with some key foundations, 6 individual foundations that we could describe to the workforce, and that we actually had our director of the NRO put in writing in a memo to the workforce so that everyone knew we had full leadership support for where we wanted to take IT at the NRO. Some examples of places where we wanted to go were to an adaptable infrastructure and to standard implementations that really were robust from a cybersecurity perspective and that were always corporately efficient, focusing on the future budgets and making sure that our IT solutions were as cost effective as possible. So that would be one that I think is there, and so I'll call it optimizing IT, but I'll say that generally speaking it's just good solid strategic planning. Another thing that we have done as a best practice here, I believe, is our IT planning lifecycle, which follows a very specific lifecycle approach that starts with our mission needs from our customers. I'll call them mission needs, not necessarily requirements, which has the connotation that you've accepted it, you funded it, and you're going to deliver on it, but just understanding the needs and the gaps that our missions have for us, and moving it through a strategic planning process, through architecture, so that we actually use our enterprise architecture work, whether it's for IT specifically, or for information assurance, or even information management, but making sure that we adapt and adopt our architecture to respond to those needs. We put it through the resourcing process. It's the federal government. You don't get anything done if you can't get a budget line for it, or you can't move your money around to support it. So we do tie it into the 5-year development program for the budget. And then we push it through execution and we measure it. So the last step is measuring our progress, not meant to be a one-time measure, but something that we do on an ongoing basis. And a lot of times we do it quarterly to see our progress there. So I would call that out as a best practice that we've implemented here in the NRO. We're on our 3rd year of going through that life cycle, and I joked early on that year 1 would be sort of a thin pencil line to walk through the cycle because it can be onerous and it was new. Year 2 was a thicker pencil line to go through it, and by year 3 it'd be a Sharpie. And I think we're about there. I certainly believe that by the time we finish the 2013 cycle for budget planning and for execution, that it will be indelible on the NRO and we'll use it for years to come. I think I'll focus on the training element here when it comes to sharing knowledge and information as a very specific example for the NRO. We have the NRO University, which I can give a shout out to. They recently won the CLO Magazine Gold Award for collaboration, which is all about information sharing. And what the NRO University has been able to do is actually deliver to us as employees nearly free training on just about any subject that you could think of. And the way they do it is by adapting coursework that is publicly available and bringing it in-house to us. Or they go out and work with sister elements across the intelligence community and the DoD to almost barter services where we share our training and in turn they share their training with us. And so I think that's a great example of what they do. We also have this collaborative learning environment online, on network, I think is what it's called, CLEON. And that's on the JWICS, the Top Secret Fabric, and it sponsors various opportunities for free information exchange and collaboration, including something called IntelliTalk, which is like a radio program on the top secret side where they interview people from industry and across the government, little short snippets, and then they can share those out with us as a means of collaborating, training, learning, but in innovative ways and for very little cost. I would say that some of the key drivers behind the best business practices that we've implemented have been a requirement to collaborate, a goal of having decisions shared by the organization, not just owned by IT, but decisions that are important to the mission and the business of the NRO, that everyone agrees and lines up behind and says that these are the right things to take on, this is the right direction to go. And you get that again through collaboration and sharing. I would say that also we have implemented a really strong governance process, not just for IT in the NRO, but for all decisions inside the NRO. But that has allowed us to ensure that we have everyone on board when we decide to spend money on a particular activity, or when we decide to issue a policy or to change a policy that has significant impact on us. We can come together as a shared team and talk it through and make sure that we all collectively believe that it's in the best interests of the NRO to go forward. Now, that sounds a little bit like everyone is playing well in the sandbox. Oftentimes, we as a CIO team will put something forward that thankfully with governance, we discover early that we had an issue with our thinking. That the way we thought it could be implemented seemed simple enough to us, but actually was very hard for the executing organizations. And so through that process, we have learned a lot of lessons and changed a lot of approaches and ultimately received better support to the NRO and a better outcome for everybody. Well, I think we use a number of opportunities and ways to develop our best business practices. I would say that the first thing we do is always try to be innovative, always try to lean forward, not on a bleeding edge of new process, new practice, or technology, but in a comfortable risk posture where we are able to see what's coming next, as opposed to building a process or a practice for something that we've already passed by. Inside NRO IT, a lot of our folks will recognize that we sort of have three sayings or three mantras that we've focused on that I believe characterize our development of best practices. The first mantra that we've used is think big, start small, and scale fast. And what that really means for our folks in best business practices or even just in IT developments is look into the future, look at the realm of the possible, think about it from a really big picture perspective. Now, once you have done that, you can see what you might possibly achieve. Rarely will we fund you to that level of achievement. Rarely will we take such a great risk, but then that's where the start small comes in. Bite off a little chunk, show some success, have a go, no-go control gate, get buy-in from your stakeholders, and then move on. And once you exhibit some performance there, the last part is about moving fast. And once you have started small, then you really do have to be able to scale quickly. Success is going to come falling on top of you, and you need to make sure that whatever you've done, whatever endeavor you have, you're able to stand up to the demands that will come with it. We did that particularly in our cloud efforts here, where we really did start very, very small. We were capable of scaling fast as we've seen success with it. A second saying that the NRO IT workforce will resonate with is test it, prove it, use it, exploit it. That the words themselves may be uniquely characteristic of the NRO. We did sort of create those four words, but the meaning behind it, everybody who's done IT understands it, or everybody who's ever been in research certainly understands that you do have to test what you're doing before you can prove that it will work, and then when you can use it and finally it's exploited. We also use that with our optimizing IT approach, and we used it with our cloud approach. We started with a few test pilots of cloud-like technologies, not even clouds, a little bit of virtualization here, a little bit of work on big data there, and then we moved into a prove it with two very specific activities that would demonstrate that we could actually do cloud computing. Not just virtualization, but move into cloud computing. We're technically still in the prove it phase for our Central Park NRO cloud, but we're quickly moving into the use it, where obviously we put real live mission applications or business applications on it. We expect in a couple of years to be in the exploit it. And sort of when we get there, it is, why wasn't cloud the answer for you? Why did you do something different? And so with many technologies, we'll walk through that phasing. And then finally, the last saying that we have inside NRO IT is faster, better, cheaper, and safer. It used to be prior to 9/11, you'd hear faster, better, cheaper, pick two, you can't have all three. After 9/11, and really as we went through the last decade and looking forward into the next decade, every new technology that we put out there, whether it's specific for IT, for information assurance, or for information management, it has to be faster than what's on the floor today, it has to be better than what's on the floor today, it has to be cheaper than what's on the floor today, and it absolutely has to improve our risk posture from a security perspective. So I think they'll recognize those. And we use all three of those sayings to test a best business practice, to sort of say, does it achieve something along the way related to thinking big but scaling fast? Does it help us in terms of the prove it or the use it phase wherever we may be? And will it actually make things faster, better, cheaper, and safer? That's a great question, because there are a lot of people who are developing great practices across the NRO. We tend to use the value of the professional network as one means of trying to understand what's going on across the NRO and trying to identify folks who are engaged in innovative practices, or maybe they're just tried and true practices that others aren't using. We have a network across the NRO of associate CIOs. They sit within the different directorates and offices, and they serve as a liaison, a purposeful link, if you will, between the mission and business elements and the CIO shop itself. They bring to us an enormous amount of ideas of how things could be better. Sometimes it's things that they've tried within their own organization. Other times it's just ideas that they have run across through industry or through others in government, or even just things that they have thought of or learned about, and they bring them forward. I think the first thing that we try to do is not discount the ideas as they come forward. Sometimes that's easy, and sometimes it's not so easy. We will often see an idea that instinctively you're like, I'm not sure that one's going to work. But we try really hard to give it further thought and let the individual who is proposing the idea to move with it and roll with it for a little bit longer. When we find ideas that have some sticking power, and we recently did a best business practice in corporate IT procurement. When it has some sticking power, we try to get it as quickly as possible into our governance structure. So it's back to that shared decisions, and put it in front of more people, and generally people who control resources, to get their feel for, is this a fair thing to do? Will this move us forward? Is this a good thing for us to take on? Everybody is limited in their resources, and so sometimes it isn't that the idea doesn't have merit, it's just, is this the right idea at the right time with the resources that we have? And again, we get them engaged. That's how we did the corporate IT procurement process. Now, probably if we picked our head up and looked backwards, we would realize it took us 2 years to move it forward, and we just never gave up. I would say that time passes quickly, which it sometimes does, but for the team that worked on it, they knew that it was the right thing to do. They quickly got senior leadership buy-in to do something, and then we just stood behind them and let them keep marching. And sometimes the best business practice is about moving the boulders out of the way and giving them a bit of a buffer so that they can keep going. But lo and behold, we are seeing results from our corporate IT procurement process. We are growing and increasing the areas that we thought we would focus on. We thought we'd do requirements for procurement. We thought we'd put a new tool in place. We thought we'd get some better enterprise license agreements done. We thought we'd have better asset management, and slowly but surely we put it in puzzle pieces. We're actually pulling all those pieces together to have a really great program. We have a great network across the intelligence community of the various CIOs. We actually get together and see each other on at least a weekly basis, and so we have the opportunity to share business practices there. I mentioned the IT Planning Lifecycle earlier that we use here at the NRO. We picked that up and adapted it from CIA. Now, many of us have CIA experience, and it worked there, so we thought we'd bring it here and try it. A lot of our work on enterprise licensing agreements has been informed and built from what our peers have already done. So we've learned how they've negotiated with some of the big vendors, and we learned what what licensing models they tried, and we assessed those to see if they would work for us. And most of that was just built on strong collaboration and strong teamwork across the intelligence community. But we also reach farther than that. We recently had a couple of guys from NASA come in and they talked to us about how they use cloud computing for the Curiosity rover. Now, that was absolutely fascinating for everybody who saw them. We loved them so much for bringing them back a second time to talk to us about their best practices. What was encouraging, I think, for everyone at NRO to hear is Curiosity, and the mission of Curiosity is a mission, a core mission for NASA. And they used actual commodity cloud computing bought off the open market. And if they were able to do that and satisfy all the requirements that they had for sharing the Curiosity data and moving it around, certainly cloud computing could be a best practice for the NRO and for our missions. So that's an example of one where we went beyond the traditional partners that we have to find some really great practices that are out there. I think there are a lot of industry best practices that we could pull from. I'll focus on just a couple for us right now. The first one is shared services platforms. Across the intelligence community, under the leadership of the CIO, we are all embarking on a shared services approach, basically do in common what's commonly done. We're not the first ones to do this. We actually might be one of the last ones to do it, I'm not sure. But it is an area where we could reach out to industry, to big companies, small companies, conglomerates, and so forth that have already come together and learned how to do shared services at a price point that is attractive, with a service level that meets the requirements. I think our needs for 100% availability are no longer unique to the intelligence community, and with customer service that will respond to our end user demands. So that certainly is one area where I do believe industry has a lot to teach us. Another one is clouds. Clouds, and more clouds. We have watched this industry change over just a very few short years, and certainly private industry, commercial companies stepped out early and quick in commodity cloud computing. We sort of took a sit back and wait approach. We learned from them and what they did. We also continued to learn from them as they solved some of the security challenges with cloud computing that caused us great concern. So we look forward to, I think the prediction was by 2014, the cloud computing industry will have it all solved on a public cloud that would meet our standards. So we'll let industry try that first, and then we'll see if we can adopt and deploy those technologies inside our own firewalls or in other configurations that look like shared services platforms for us. And I think a third area where we are still learning from industry right now is how to do return on investment. How to actually put mission success and mission support in some kind of dollars and cents terms that allow easier decisions by NRO as an example, or by the intelligence community writ large. You know, it's often an impassioned plea, and the best salesperson might win the day because we don't use traditional return on investment measures. I'm not suggesting that's the sole thing that should carry the day, but it would be nice if we put some real numbers down there and achieved certain capabilities and certain targets based on that. Through the ICCIO's work on the IT enterprise that we're doing, we are driven by D&I leadership to some specific savings metrics and targets. I think that will be a great example for us to show some ROI, to show we had to reduce our budgets, but here's how we maintain the service levels. And again, I think industry knows how to do that, and we can learn from them. Well, I think there are several areas that we need to focus on for effective service or improved service to our organizations and to our missions. Let's start with we can never underestimate the value of high quality service at the right price point, very securely, and at the speed that our mission needs it. So it's a bit of a basic, looks a lot like infrastructure type support, but I think every IT organization has to be tops at providing that so that you gain ultimate satisfaction of your customers, and they actually will give you opportunities to try some different things. But if I move from that, or assume that you have 100% availability and your customer service team is awesome, your hardware, if it has an issue, is replaced in near real time, and you never have a breach and everything's absolutely secure. Let's just assume that that's what we've been able to achieve. Then I think you can look at a few new technologies that we need to focus on to ensure improved service and continued really great service to our organizations. The first one is on assured identity. I'll call it that. It has many names. But in our world in particular, but I believe even in industry, it is making sure that if you have access to a piece of data, that I know irrefutably that it was you, that it wasn't your admin or it wasn't someone spoofing you, but that it was actually you. And I also know without doubt that you were authorized to see that piece of information, and I can trace what you did with it once you got it. We learned a lot of lessons with WikiLeaks and with other things. What they generally boil down to is, again, something I'll just call assured identity, and making sure that we know who is accessing our information, why they're accessing the information, when, and so forth. Generally, when we talk about assured identity, we think about people, but we need the same exact thing for machine-to-machine engagements, so that we understand if I got a request or a service call from another organization that was a machine-based call, that I have confidence that that machine does indeed have the right to come seek information out of the NRO or anywhere else and then take it back and use it in different ways. Which leads me to a second area, which I'll call defensive data. That's not a term that is generally used, and I'm not suggesting that it's an industry standard term, but I'll just use that to describe it, which is making sure that the data goes beyond just tagging, but making sure that the data itself understands how it can be used and how it should be used. That the data is smart enough to not give itself up to you if you don't have the right clearances or the right access levels, or you're not in the right SCIF environment or something, that it knows not to serve up that particular piece of data, not to serve itself up to you. On the other side, it knows who it could bond with from a data perspective, that this data could bond with another piece of data because they share the same classification level, or they share a low enough classification level that they could be combined easily and quickly. So again, I'll just call it defensive data. Some will call it smart data, some will call it tag data, or whatever, but it is really making sure that between the assured identity of the person and the wrappers on the data, that in real time information can be shared and can be collaborated with without worry that it is being risked or put at risk. And then I think a third area that I will talk about is the ease of creating applications. If we assume that we really do have a multi-level architecture for IT, where we have infrastructure as a service and platform as a service and software as a service, and somewhere along the way we created knowledge as a service and separated out the data, that you really want to move into something that looks like an Apple App Store or an Android Marketplace, where your users can come in and either create their own apps and simply slide them into the portfolio of apps to be used, or they can download, just like you do on your smartphone, a new application that they'll use for as long as the application is good for them. And that would imply that you have some metrics, but everybody could be the code writer of the day. And then over time, the cream will rise to the the cream will rise to the top. And those applications that are popular will continue to exist and be accessed. And those applications that were sort of fly by night and met a one-time need, they'll just fall off. And you can just either leave them in the store for later, or you'll know the metrics and you can move them out of the store. But that really is changing some of the models of how we do software development. Not implying that you still that you still won't need professional software application developers and folks who know scientific algorithms to do the really high intense and to do the really heavy lifting on large-scale enterprise applications. But you want a way to give someone in the field who wants to just cobble together the information a quick ability to do that in an easy way to use the data that is out there and accessible to them. So those are sort of, after you've done really great service, 3 areas on identity, on defensive data, and on new software applications that I think are necessary for a good IT organization in the future. We're going to move there, and oftentimes we do it behind our own firewall. But what remains a challenge for us is ensuring that we haven't introduced unnecessary risk into our IT environment and into our enterprise. Commodity IT changes really fast, and new technologies are available to us constantly. And oftentimes we take more time than is available to test out every bit of that new technology before we insert it into our enterprise. And I think finding a more contemporary risk management framework that is properly balanced, so I'm not suggesting that you just bring things in and take a risk, but you really find a more contemporary risk management framework that can be faster in its response and actually allow us to understand new security risks quicker, and then make judgments and decisions on how to overcome the security risks that we think we have to overcome, and then just move more quickly to implement the commodity IT is probably the biggest area where we're struggling. We tend to be conservative in our risk posture. We tend to be conservative in our approach to security. We all believe in defense in depth, but even then, when we have a lot of walls, we still are worried about what a new technology might do and how it might penetrate. And so I don't even know what the answer will be on moving to commodity IT, other than what I'll just simply call a contemporary risk management framework, and hope that we'll figure that out over time.